Alright, so we finally have some patch notes and some PvP specific changes too, which is great. So I'm going to talk about the changes and how they're going to affect each spec, and then at the very end I'll talk about if it's going to impact the meta in any way. Right off the bat, we have Death Knight, Icy Death Torrent nerf. I don't even play this talent, so who cares? So Boomy's getting a couple changes. Umbral Intensity is getting buffed, Star Surge is getting buffed, Starfall is getting buffed, and Harmony of the Heavens is getting buffed. But we're going to talk about all this later on the Boomy PvP changes because there's more there. They're making Blood Talons and Land Strike affect Rampant Ferocity. I don't think this is going to really matter too much. This is just the AoE bite talent that I don't think anyone really plays. Maybe it'll affect team fights in Battleground Blitz, but I don't think it's going to really matter too much. Next, Devastation. All of their abilities are getting nerfed by 6%, and Firestorm doesn't matter because they don't play it. And then they're also getting Engulf buffed by 30%, which is one of their hero trees. So overall, a slight dev nerf, but it could potentially open up other hero trees for them, because a 30% damage buff to Engulf could be pretty significant, because from what I was reading, Engulf does a decent amount of damage. So it could end up being a buff. It's kind of hard to tell, because I haven't really seen anyone playing that talent, but I don't think it's going to be too major and like make them insanely broken now. Next up, Vicious Hunt buff for BM, nerf for survival. So it's a 10% buff to BM kill command pretty much, and a 10% nerf to survival kill command. Okay. I mean, baby buff survival, baby nerf for survival, baby buff for BM. BM needs lots of buffs if it wants to be a spec. Next up is how the pack critical strike damage, critical strike bonus buffed to 5% was 3% and 11% was 7%. So the survival one is actually kind of insane because it stacks 3 times, and that means this is going to get them 33% crit chance, pretty much baseline, because it's just whenever they're pet crits, which is going to happen probably even more now because they're also getting more crit. For BM, it's 15%, which is decent, but nothing major. But then going on to the next one, Furious Assault, probably is not going to matter too much. It's like Raptor Strike damage, and I don't think Raptor Strike really does any damage for them. But the Call the Herd one is actually pretty massive because it's a 30% damage buff to Kill Shot. And that plus the crit chance, so crit kill shots are going to probably be pumping for survival. They did get a 10% nerf to kill command, but I don't think kill command is really any of their damage. It's just like a builder for them, isn't it? So I think overall, decent buff to survival, and a baby buff to BM, which is kind of funny that BM got less of a buff than survival did, even though BM is like the worst spec in the game. Survival is probably going to be around the same tier, maybe a bit higher. I kind of have to see how strong it feels now. Next up, we have Fire Mage buffs. They're buffing Living Bong by 30%. They're buffing Pyroblast by 5% and Flame Strike by 10%. The Flame Strike build already does actually decent damage, so buffing that by 10% could actually make it pretty scary into melee cleaves. Buffing Frostfire Bolt by 25% for fire. I don't think this is going to matter too much. These are mainly arcane changes, and I don't really know how much damage the Arcane Phoenix does, so it's kind of hard to tell what this 10% damage nerf is really going to do. And then Arcane Soul. So I think it just reduces how many stacks of clear casting and stuff that you can get during the window, which could be kind of big because it could result in a burst nerf, and that's kind of all that Arcane really has going for it. But I don't think it's going to change too much. And as for the fire changes, I don't think this is going to change much either. I think fire is still going to be like the worst caster in the game. Maybe it'll be a tiny bit better, more like comparable with Demo. Next up, Ret Paladin changes. They're nerfing Ret's Mastery by 10%, but they're buffing all holy damage by 5%. So pretty much, so for now, it's going to be a buff, but if Ret gets to the point where they can have over 50% mastery, it's going to be a nerf. But until then, it's a buff, and I don't think they're ever going to get to that point because Ret never gets to that point unless mastery is going to get unnerfed. Then for disc, the only thing that matters is they're buffing Purge the Wicked damage by 10% or 20%, which will buff their atonement, which is kind of actually a buff, actually. Then Shadow gets a Void Blast damage buff, but I don't think it really does anything just based off the tooltip. It's kind of just looks like a generator. Next on to Ellie. Ellie's was kind of confusing because so they're buffing the damage of elemental and physical damage based on their mastery by 35%. So I think this is going to be kind of similar to the Ret. So like 1 point of mastery is 35% more important than it was before. And then they're also nerfing the damage by 6%. So I feel like this is going to probably end up kind of evening out if you're playing Mastery, but they're kind of trying to force you into playing Mastery, I think. Then they buffed Tempest, which I don't think is really going to do too much. I think Ellie is still going to be pretty much the exact same spot. I think these changes aren't going to really do anything at all. As for Enhance, all damage reduced by 4%, Elite Blast damage increased by 20%. If this was the only Enhance change, it would be so funny. But thankfully, they are getting some buffs down in the PvP section. They're also getting the Tempest change, which I don't think is going to matter. And then they're also buffing the damage of Tremor and Searing Bolt Volley, which are decent, I think. I don't think they're going to matter too much either. And then Destro is getting a 5% damage buff, which is kind of cool if you play Destro. I don't think this is going to matter too much either. And now let's get into the PvP specific changes. So right off the bat, they're buffing Rip and Rig damage, which if you've been looking at Feral Druids, you're like, what the fuck? Feral's insane. Why are they buffing them more? But then you go down and you see the Feral changes, and they've reduced Taste for Blood during Tiger's Fury by 50%, which buffs it by 12%, so it's now a 60% buff instead of a 12% buff. And then Saber Jaws, which increases the damage of Ferocious Bite if they have excess energy by 80%, is now only going to be buffing it by 40%. So pretty much what I'm taking from these two changes is they're nerfing Bite, buffing Bleeds. Bite's still going to be doing decent damage, but it's actually getting like a 50% damage nerf, which is insane. So no more insane like 2 million bites. So we're getting a nerf to Lunar Calling, and they're also getting a nerf to Umbral Embrace. This is going to kind of balance out a lot of the buffs from the PvE section, because Umbral Intensity is going to increase the damage of Wrath and Starfire, and Starfire is also getting buffed here, but these two are going to be nerfing Starfire and Wrath, so it's going to kind of balance out. So for the most part, it's going to be even with a Star Surge buff, so slight buff to Boomy in their burst. Next up, Ice Lance damage getting nerfed by 30%. This is pretty massive, since Ice Lance is 100% of Frost damage, but they have a second build that they can go. They can go the Glacial Spike with Ray of Frost build, which is still going to be insane. But the cool thing is that is actually disruptible with the Ice Lance build. You can't do anything about it. They're just sitting there pressing Ice Lance over and over again. With this, you can actually at least stop Glacial Spikes and Ray of Frost. Whether that's going to be better or worse is up in the air. For certain comps, it's definitely going to be better. For some comps, it's definitely going to be worse. I think there's a good chance that Frost Mage is going to really fall off. It's probably not going to be the best caster in the game. It's probably not going to be like S++ tier anymore. It's probably still going to be decent, like S tier, but just not the most broken thing in the game, which is probably for the best. Next up, some changes. So these are technically both Brewmaster nerfs, because Brewmaster has some wombo combo they can do where they can hit someone for like 2 million with a cheat burst, so they've nerfed that by a ton, so I don't think that's ever going to happen again. They're nerfing the cooldown reduction on Revival by 17%, which is kind of good overall, because I think Revival is just a really toxic spell. Being able to use it during CC, especially in BGs, it's so annoying. It just hits everyone. It's just really annoying to deal with. And then for buffs, they're buffing Life Cocoon by 30%, which I think is only going to matter in BGs. I think in Arena, you are pretty much never breaking Life Cocoon. But the big change is Enveloping Mist can no longer be dispelled, which is really massive, because that's kind of just their big hot. That's kind of what most of their healing is based around. So no longer being dispelled, that is a massive buff. I'm not sure if this is actually going to make Mischief insane or even like playable right now, because they're still going to be struggling with the exact same things. Their healing just in general isn't the best. So we'll have to see. I don't think it's going to be any better than it was before, but this change makes it so that potentially in the future, Mischief is going to be in a really good spot. Next up, Holy Prayer of Mending increased by 65% in PvP combat. This is actually pretty insane. This is just an instant heal that heals multiple people, and buffing by 65% is pretty decent. I think this is going to be a little bit of a buff for Holy. I don't think it's going to make it that much better, but it is something. And then Enhancement. Enhancement's getting some massive buffs. They're buffing Lava Lash by 60%, Storm Strike and Wind Strike by 60%, and Wind Fury by 60%. So that's pretty much the 3 builds. You have a Storm Strike build, a Lava Lash build, and a Wind Fury build. All of them are getting buffed by 60%. I think this is going to probably be really good for enhancement. I'm not exactly sure how massive it's going to be because I just see enhancements so little. It's kind of hard to judge how big of a buff this is for them. I'd imagine that they're definitely not going to be the worst spec in the game anymore. I feel like they'll probably be up to like a B tier. So they'll actually be playable because of these changes. But I could be completely wrong. Maybe these things are doing so little damage that this isn't even going to matter. But I honestly doubt that. And finally, last but not least, we have some warrior nerfs. So Thunderous Roar is being reduced by 15%. Arms auto attacks are no longer nerfed to PvP. I don't even know why they were in the first place. And Odin's Fury is being reduced by 20% in PvP combat. So let's talk about Fury first, because it's the better spec. Nerf to Thunderous Roar and Odin's Fury. It's a kind of a decent nerf, but I don't think it's going to make Fury bad by any means. I think Fury is still going to be one of the best specs in the entire game. I think a lot of these, like Odin's Fury plus Thunderous Roar, is kind of just like added cleave damage that they have. It's not their like main thing. They're still going to be doing insane damage with, their basic rotation. It's still going to have really good burst. I think Fury is still going to be just the best melee in the game. But this is a slight nerf to it, which is always good. And then as for arms, I don't think they're changing at all. They're using a bit of Thunderous Roar damage, which kind of sucks. And this auto attack change, I don't think is going to do anything. I think they're going to be in the exact same spot, which is like B tier. Which I guess is fine. I feel like it's just kind of one of those things where it's this low because all the things better it are just a lot better than it. So in the future, if they tone a lot of things down, I think arms is going to be fine. But for right now, it's kind of meh. So yeah, some decent changes, definitely in the right direction. Some things definitely got completely missed that probably should get some attention, like Aflock, Sub-Rogue, Fire Mage, and BM Hunter. But we'll have to see what changes they make in the coming weeks before the season starts. Here's how I think the tier list is looking now. So the big changes is I bumped Frost Mage down to S tier, just because I'm not sure how strong it's going to end up being with the new build that they're going to have to run. Then I dropped Feral down to B tier, because I think these nerfs are pretty massive. That's 50% bite nerf. That was the only thing that was making Feral OP. Survival, however, is up to A tier. I think these changes can be pretty helpful. And Enhance is up to C tier, but it could be B tier. I'll have to wait and see how strong it actually ends up being. And for the most part, everything else is relatively in the same spot. I'm not going to go over healers just because I'm not completely certain on the strength of all of them right now. I just be going off of what other people are saying, so I'd rather just leave it to those people. But for DPS, these changes were all pretty good. A lot of the specs are a lot closer in strength now, and there are only a couple outliers now, so I'm pretty confident going into the season. But that's it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed. Peace.